Hi everyone, Comic Reviewer here. This time reviewing on Incredibles 2. Now, as you know, Incredibles 2 is meant to be the sequel and carry on from the 2004 film, The Incredibles. Now, what's actually interesting is that this is actually a rare moment where a Pixar film continues directly after the events of the first film, like Finding Dory. And pretty much with Brad Bird is that it pretty much like from the success of Incredibles and pretty much postponed the development of a sequel to work on other films and eventually got to do Incredibles 2. Now, the premise of the film takes place literally after the first film. We have Bob, Helen, Violet, Dash, and Jack pretty much being forced to relocate again after what happened with the Undermimer, pretty much making the events of Rise of the Undermimer non-canon. And pretty much we're also introduced to this rich guy known as Winston, who pretty much wants to make supers legal, and as well as, show the world that the world still needs superheroes. And you've also got his sister, who's basically the tech girl and the one developing the tech in that. So they pretty much want Helen to become this kind of, sponsor for the company, and as well as show that, that the world still needs supers. And it's kind of heavily implied that Winston and the others have doubts about Bob basically being in action. And so basically you have Bob being put onto the position of being the kind of den father, making sure Jack does his maths, having Violet deal with her own problems, and him discovering Jack has superpowers. Which actually is quite surprising that they didn't figure it out sooner or later. So pretty much the film also has Helen dealing with the Screenslaver, who is basically meant to be this mysterious villain, and there are hints and clues to who the Screenslaver is. What's interesting is that, unlike Syndrome, who wanted to delude himself into being a superhero, Screenslaver is the opposite. He's basically wanting to prove the world that the world doesn't need supers, and there are hints to who the Screenslaver is. So, I think what's interesting is that it does feel like there are some continuity errors. For example, in the first film, it was heavily implied by Dicker that due to Bob and his family's actions of stopping Syndrome's drone, that this may have changed the people's opinions on supers, and you do see them dressing as superheroes. So I'm guessing they sort of retconned it a little way. And what's actually interesting is that some events from the first film are still brought up. For example, Helen mentioning how things were different before on the island, how they mentioned about the house getting destroyed when the jet landed, and Bob's original job. So, I think with Incredibles 2, it still holds up. What's actually interesting as well is that at the start, when you have Tony Reinger's interrogation by Dicker, it's meant to be a reference to the short film Jack Attacks, where you had the babysitter Kyrie basically having to deal with Jack's powers. And I would have expected her to have appeared in the sequel to do some snooping around and discover more about Violet's family. I know that there were plans to include her and her family, but Brad Bird basically said, no, we are not going to have her in. It would basically make no sense. I could see why in some way. So, also, at the same time, it still keeps the same 50s element in The Incredibles, and still works well. What's actually interesting is that, as well, when Bob mentions about when they go to their new house, about how a house used to be owned to a guy who liked to come and go, heavily implying to have been Syndrome's house. And yeah, I think that would have made more sense. So in my opinion, Incredibles 2 took off well. It did a good story, it made a good premise, and basically still had some of the cast members still doing a good job. So in my opinion, a thumbs up. Still good and still alright. So, Comic Reviewer here, signing out.